This is another Prepper Potpourri pondering. I was reading a book recently and it was on the Great Depression in the United States. And it made me think, what would it be like if that same Great Depression happened today? How would it be different? My parents, my father was born in 1905, my mother in 1907. They were newly married when the stock market crashed in 1929 with my sister was just born. But the funny thing is, I never really heard hardly any stories about the Depression. You know how you hear about people talking about how terrible it was, they lived through the Depression, da-da-da-da-da. My parents never talked about it. All I know is that both of them had came from the country to the city. Both of them were raised on family farms. And according to my mom, couldn't wait to leave. Both of them had went through school, graduated from 8th grade, and then went out into the working world. And when they newly got married, my dad got a job in a greenhouse. And part of that was they gave you boarding at a boarding house. And my mom actually cooked all the meals at the boarding house for the men. She had to make fresh bread every day, pies every day, etc. Which is probably why she was such a great cook. But they never talked about how hard things were, even though I'm sure they were. But you know what? Things were pretty hard for them too when they were on their family farms. I mean, my mom was born on a homestead in South Dakota. It wasn't like you had insulation and a furnace in the winter. I mean, it was cold. They had to do a lot of things to survive. And I kind of thought about that. The Great Depression was hard for so many people. Nationwide, it was about 1 in 4, a little over 1 in 4 were unemployed. While here in Michigan, it was actually higher than 1 in 3 people unemployed. We were one of the heaviest states hit. But if a lot of people had recently come from the farms to the city to find work, so they had certain skills already. A lot of them knew how to garden. They were good seamstresses, so they could sew clothes out of used material, other clothes, whatever they could find. They knew how to save money. They cooked basically from scratch. So that was where they were at then. But I think of it now. How many of us would have our 14-year-olds ready to go out into the job market and hold down a regular job? And then on top of it, how many of us have the survival skills that my parents' generation did? For my parents, I don't think the Great Depression was that bad because what they came from wasn't that great. I mean, my dad's father died when he was 7 years old. So his mother had to raise 7 children on kind of like a dirt farm, right? I mean, very, very hard living. A lot of food came from the kindness of others. And my mother, like I said, was in harsh environment when she was first born, and she was one of 8 children. So for them, what they were going through in the Great Depression wasn't as hard as, think if that hit us right now. Okay? I remember when we had a recession a little while back, for people, losing their cable or their cell phone was, just terrible, But think of this. What if you had no utilities and it was the winter? You lost your house or your living arrangements because you couldn't pay your rent or the mortgage. Think of how things would change today. Or would they? Part of the Great Depression, a lot of the social programs that we have today were created. When you think of it, that's when food stamps were created a little bit later in the Great Depression. Also, government surplus food was given to communities, and there was welfare. Not like exactly we know today, but that is kind of when it existed. So, Today, I think people expect a lot more. You know, you hear things, why do people not prep? Well, they expect the government to take care of them. You know, people for the Great Depression didn't expect the government. They wanted help, but they didn't necessarily expect it. And now people take it for granted, right? If you lose your job, you get unemployment. You might qualify for food stamps. You might even qualify eventually for welfare for your family. You might qualify for Medicaid, so you have health insurance. So there are a lot of governmental programs, and people expect those to be there even if we had another Great Depression. Now, the question is, if 1 in 3 people needed those programs, would the government be able to actually provide them today? If that depression lasted very long, I think that would be very, very difficult. So they might have to cut back on programs. And how would people cope with that today? I mean, I will admit I am softer than my mother's generation, and I'm sure my mother's generation was softer than their parents' generation. I mean, my mother's father left school after 3rd grade, and he actually went out on his own because he didn't like stepdad, and he worked at various farms in various places. Now, he was one of the most well-read men I know, but he did not have the schooling. But he was, I mean, he could blacksmith, he could tame a horse, plant a 100-acre farm. I mean, he was an amazing man that lived to be 93. Well, I can't say that same thing about my husband or myself. We don't have all those skills. I mean, we depend on others. But that's another problem. I think during the Great Depression, people were more used to helping each other out. You know, you read about that again and again. Neighbors would help out other neighbors. If they were lucky enough to find food, they'd help out the other family. And there was a lot, of course, bartering that went back and forth for services. And, you know, at that day, there was the bums, right? And the hobos. Street people. Now, can you imagine right now if people would be going knocking on the door, asking for work? How people go, who's a stranger? What are they doing in my yard? You know, I don't think they would just say, yes, I've got some work for you. Come around here. You know, I don't think we're nearly as trusting as probably we were of people during the Great Depression. Now, I want to say that we still live in a very generous country. I mean, look how we help other countries when they have a disaster. And here, believe me, the churches help out tremendously to the soup kitchens and to clothing drives and to food banks and communities at large. It's not just churches, but we have a lot of people that try to help out others. They try to be a good neighbor. So I don't want to diminish that at all. I think we still have that in our country's genes. But what would you think? I mean, yes, don't please go, oh, everybody is so snowflake today, blah, 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 blah. You know, that's an easy thing to say. But think of the psychology now. Think of yourself. So what would you be like? What would your family be like? Your relatives, your cousins, your community, people at large. How do you think they would really deal with that? I mean, to have tent communities out there, right? Or I guess you're lucky if you had a tent for your family. Just think about how that would happen if the Great Depression happened today. So this is just kind of an exercise. I would love to hear from you how you think we would deal with that and how things would change. Would we as a government run out of money to help everybody? And then what would happen? This is Prepper Potpourri, just pondering a little and like to know what you think. Please comment below, and as always, please subscribe, share this video, and thumbs up if you like it. Thank you.